Adam Sos here for Rebel News, and I am on location at Fairview Baptist Church, where Pastor Tim Stevens, who you'll very likely recall, faced heartbreaking arrests and jail time for daring to keep his doors open throughout COVID-19 restrictions, is now tackling another contentious issue in society, with many of his flock turning to him for leadership in how to address the drag story time debate within the city of Calgary. Pastor Tim Stevens has started events of his own that are taking place at public libraries in response to these drag story times, and they are called Readings from True Royalty. To learn more about them, in a moment I'll be joined by Pastor Tim Stevens. Over the past few weeks, Calgary has been thrust into the spotlight of the debate surrounding drag queen story hours. This is a completely contentious issue, and each side of this debate seems entrenched with very little common ground between them. On one side, you have the progressive supporters of these types of events who seem to dogmatically support them, even when content is released on social media showing that some of what is taking place at these events is categorically unacceptable for children. On the other side, you have the group which these progressives would accuse of being bigots, families, religious groups, and individuals who are simply concerned that what is occurring at these events is nothing less than the sexualization of children. Calgary's activist Mayor Jyoti Gondek, who is no stranger to politicizing police enforcement, has effectively made it illegal for people concerned about these events to protest at libraries around the city. Despite these politicized efforts to ban these protests, some have continued, nevertheless, to resist, including Pastor Derek Reimer, who was actually arrested for taking a peaceful stand against these events. If you'd like to contribute to the legal efforts to defend these people, or if you yourself received a fine for peacefully protesting drag story hours, you can go to fightcensorshipfines.com now. You may be entitled to free legal defense. With our radicalized mayor locking up dissidents and many seemingly oblivious to why some might be concerned that grown men dressed as women are courting children, it's no surprise that some are wondering if any sensibility can be restored to the conversation at all. Well, restoring sensibility and providing an alternative perspective is exactly what one Calgary pastor is attempting to do.
There was no need for more. Male and female were sufficient. To add to God's design is wrong and inconsistent. Some people like to say that gender can be picked, but this is foolish thinking, for genders can't be switched.
Well, Pastor Tim Stevens, thanks again so much for joining us. It's been a little while since we've been here. It's good to be back. In the face of sort of all this controversy, everything that's going on with these drag story times, a great sort of sense of divide, two sides deeply entrenched, very little sort of common ground. You've come up with an event, and I had the opportunity off camera to swing by and check it out. Readings from True Royalty. Tell us a little bit about this event.
Yeah, it's a bit of a play on what they're doing as they talk about readings from royalty, as drag queens and drag kings come and read to the kids. And so we're obviously in a battle of truth. There's lies out there being propagated, and lies that are very dangerous, especially to young people. And so we thought it's important. The church is supposed to be the pillar, the buttress of truth.
Yeah.
And so for us to go into those same public spaces and to be reading to kids books that affirm the goodness of boyhood and girlhood, so they can be confident in who they are in this age of gender confusion, just be a witness to the truth.
So it is effectively, they're having these events, you're saying, okay, like we're going to have our own alternative. We're going to go into these very same spaces and sort of profess that truth that we believe in. So there's a couple of concerns. One, and obviously on the sort of most aggressive front, is that these events, their events, not your events, are sexualizing children. But two, additionally, that the actual stories or the content being read is inappropriate. What sort of content, or what's like the subject matter that you guys present to folks by contrast to them?
Yeah, I've never been to one of their events, but I would imagine, just based on pictures and things that we've seen, is it's not appropriate for young children. And I'm saddened that parents are willing to bring their kids, because it's not forced upon parents to bring their kids, but they're actually willingly bringing their kids there. But the books that we're reading are books that are based upon biblical creational values. Obviously, there are only two genders, and we know that scientifically, biologically, we know that in Scripture. And so just to tell kids that if they're a boy, well, they ought to cultivate those things that are part of a good masculinity. So take the different hormones and things that they have naturally, and use their strength as boys, as men, for the service and the good of others. In the same way with the nurturing characteristics of girls and of women, so that they would aspire to, serve and care for others. And so we just want to affirm those good things that are obvious in nature that every civilization up to ours has affirmed, such that our kids can help navigate some of the madness that is happening in our society today.
You touched on a few important things there, and I think one is very much, and you'll hear this whether it be in public school systems or elsewhere, but boys are often sort of led down this road of like those positive masculine traits. Well, they're bad things, and you should be ashamed of that. Have you sort of had any feedback from parents or from even some of the kids saying that it's like good to not be told that I'm bad?
Yeah, I think what we try to say very often as a church here is that this idea of toxic masculinity is a club being used to make men more effeminate, and as they're seeking to make this androgynous, egalitarian utopia here in our society, and this doesn't work. Men are now going to listen to other men who aren't necessarily good role models, because they want to express their masculinity. And so boys need to be taught what it means to be a man. And we have so few men, real men in our society that can teach them that, how to have strength under control, how to serve others, how to lead in a way for the advantage and the good of others. And so it's very important that our young boys know that, in the same way that our women don't grow up thinking, if I'm going to have value and significance in this society, then I need to do what the men can do. That's just going to lead them to feel unfulfilled and lead them to feel a failure, as if somehow they're being oppressed by other people. And so women should excel in their gifts that God has designed them for, and take enjoyment and pleasure in that.
Now, another thing you touched on there, and I didn't really plan on discussing this, but I think it bears discussion. It may be more philosophical than theological, but where do you sort of draw your line, or what's your perspective on the fact that maybe not all of these events? I mean, I think drag events are inherently meant to be subversive. It's part of in the most respectful terms, art form of drag. It's meant to be subversive for adults. What do you make of the fact that parents are taking their kids voluntarily to this thing that is, even in the most innocent cases, inappropriate, and in some of the extreme cases, like we've seen on social media, potentially criminal, what they're exposing children to? Where do you draw that line between sort of freedom, parental responsibility, and just something being so morally wrong? Yeah,
well, we did live in a society where not too long ago, things like that would have been illegal. The things that they parade on the streets today would have been when pushed into the darkness, because you couldn't do that in the public. You couldn't do that. It would corrupt the minds of the youth and of children. And so we used to have that sense of morality. Now, obviously, we've had a shift in morality. I believe it's a shift in religious commitments and religious values in our society. And so when we recognize that shift is happening, we have to be mindful of our own tactics and philosophy here and now. While I would wish, if I was the mayor or the prime minister, I would do things a bit differently than what's being done right now. But to understand that parents do have the freedom right now to bring their kids to a drag show. So our best bet is to seek to persuade those parents. They don't need to feel like, I imagine many of them feel that they're doing a good thing for their kids, because they're trying to, they've bought into this whole woke agenda. And so they see it as a moral good to bring their kids to these things. And so they need to be taught as well. And so we need to make sure that we're using our words and not in a mean, angry way, but using our words to convey the truth to parents and children alike. And really, it should be an easy task, because reality is on our side. Yeah.
It's really interesting. When I had the opportunity just to sort of swing by that first event while you were first piloting this, and kind of wanted to keep it a little off the radar, we didn't want to come and film. And obviously also out of respect for the kids there, we didn't want to show up filming the kids in an event without your permission. But it was incredibly interesting to see just sort of the positivity, the togetherness. There wasn't really any protests. There wasn't any sort of infighting. People were just gathering there together. But one of the things your wife said to me that sort of, I think for me, hit the nail on the head. There's so much negativity, and there's fighting, and like we said, these deeply entrenched divided lines. But your wife said, we wanted to show people what we're about, not just what we're against. So with these lines so divided, these events, are you sort of encouraging anyone to come check it out, hear these stories? Is this rather than this sense of division and exclusion, an opportunity for people to come out and have a conversation, or maybe hear a little bit about your perspective?
Yeah, well, we did 2 library events, one at Seton Library, one at Fish Creek Library on the same day, and both of them filled up very quickly. And so as many of these events as we can plan, people would come. And there's many people excited to come to these things. And we are hoping to plan a Canada-wide initiative with a number of churches, book spaces and libraries, and go and do these shows, because it's important for people to see in our world today that the majority, I believe, of the folks in this country still know what a man is, what a woman is, and think what's happening to our children, especially in our schools with these drag queen story hours, are a great travesty to our children, and will corrupt the minds of the next generation, especially when children are getting, chemically castrated by taking these chemicals and hormones, and how even some of them are going under the knife to be mutilated, and functioning organs being removed. And there are people seriously harmed by this ideology. So it's important for many to rise up, and I think many will come and support that in our nation.
And do you think that part of what you're doing is saying, rather than just saying, well, and you are saying this, but those things are bad, we condemn them, but you're proposing, it's not we hate you, it's not you're right, we're necessarily wrong, there's this other opportunity, and here's what we're proposing.
Right. It's because you could protest, oh, I don't like gay marriage, I don't like transgenderism, or you could say, let me show you the beauty of marriage between one man and one woman faithfully. Let me show you the beauty of a family where you have many children, and you have boys who know what it means to be a boy, and girls who know what it means to be a girl, and have them grow up and love. Boys love their masculinity, and women love their femininity, and express that in normative ways. I think that is a beautiful thing. And I imagine that if folks came into our congregation or into our home, and with my wife and our 8 children, they would recognize the beauty of that. And so we want to certainly portray a positive image to our children and to the world about how God has made us and how he has designed us. And that will lead to the flourishing of the human race.
There's nuanced conversations that can be had in politics. We can talk about a little bit more government control, a little bit less controlled spending, more liberal spending. There's sort of nuanced political conversations we can have. But this issue, it doesn't even seem like there's an effort to work towards a common goal. One side wants to destroy gender. Often their versions of another gender are in a way a parody of it. But so much of what has been the staple of Western civilization, the pillars on which our societies operate, they're fundamentally trying to tear down. Meanwhile, you have another group that is opposed to this and trying to uphold this. Is there a way to find common ground? Is there a way to mend that fence? And is there a way to bring people back together, bring some sensibility to the conversation? Because it seems like we're on a trajectory of, obviously there's pendulum swing, but it seems like this divide is virtually unprecedented.
Yeah, I think what we're seeing right now is a movement and an ideology that is antithetical to our heritage as a Christian country. The values being espoused now are values that are meant to tear down what was. And so there is no common ground. It's not as if we see, okay, there's a problem of homelessness in our city, so what will we do? Yeah. And you have competing voices giving arguments for how do we tackle that issue. Right. But the end goal here is not an end goal that we're all in agreement with. The end of gender or the end of masculinity or femininity is not a goal that everyone supports. Yeah. But rather, we actually see the flourishing of society when we affirm the goodness of masculinity and femininity, and then live within the bounds of how God has made us to live, and the bounds of who we are, right down to the DNA in ourselves, every last one of ourselves. And so there is no real common ground. We are in a huge, this is not just a cultural conflict. Yeah. This is a huge crisis culturally. And so it's important to recognize that some of these ideas, these Marxist kinds of ideas have only led to the death of millions and millions of people. Mm-hmm. And unless there's a correction here in our nation, it's going to get quite terrible here.
Well, it's certainly a conversation that we're going to be following moving forward, with so many of these politicians ideologically married to this. And I think I'd agree with you. Many of the folks, certainly many people watching this, are not in agreement with this. There is a divide that in some way or another must be overcome or overwhelmed. I'm sure we'll be chatting with you with this moving forward. There are a lot of these sort of gender-centered ideas. I'm looking forward to an update when you start having more of these events right across the country. I've heard quite a bit of interest in this as well. So I do want to thank you so much for doing this and for taking a moment to speak with us. I really appreciate it, everyone. Pastor Tim Stevens again. As always, I want to thank you all so much for tuning in. For Rebel News, I'm Adam Sos. As you no doubt know, taking a stand against politicians who believe that they can wield police forces as their own ideological arms of enforcement is critical to defending the legal fabric of our society. If you agree that we do need to take a stand and fight this fight, or if you yourself received a ticket for peacefully protesting drag story hours at libraries in Calgary, go to fightcensorshipfines.com now.